The sea mist moved like cold breath through Porthmeor, St. Ives, England, leaving salt on window panes and a dull shine on the granite steps. In a cramped solicitor's office that smelled of old paper and damp wool, Eliza Penrose, 46, hair pinned back with a bent clip, sat with her hands folded in her lap. The radiator ticked and hissed. Outside, gulls screamed over the harbor. Inside, the clock on the wall beat out a steady, indifferent rhythm. Mr. Corbett, the solicitor, adjusted his spectacles and read the line again. To my great niece, Eliza Penrose, I leave Truhella's Grotto, the sea cave beneath Porthmeor Head. There was a snort from the back. Giles Harrington, a developer from London, with a polished watch and a voice like a door closing on velvet, leaned in the doorway. A cave? How fitting, he murmured, examining his fingernails. It matches the rest of her prospects. Dark and useless. Heat rose in Eliza's cheeks. She thought of the council flat that smelled of frying oil and detergent, of the shift-worn shoes she hid under the bed. She heard the scrape of a chair as someone stood to leave, the rustle of a designer coat, the clean perfume of money passing by. You'll find little use for that hole, Giles added lightly, unless you plan to live with crabs. The solicitor cleared his throat, but the room had already tilted. Eliza felt the rough glaze of the chipped ceramic lark in her pocket, her mother's, once a music box that had fallen and never played again. She clutched it till her fingers hurt. Behind the glass of the office door, the corridor's fluorescent hum buzzed, then died. What remained was a heavy silence, the kind that makes even gulls pause mid-cry, a silence packed with the weight of someone else's judgment, and a stubborn thread of indignation tightening inside her. Eliza had grown up in the shadow of the harbor walls, where salt settled into everything. Tea tins, ribbon drawers, the corners of prayer books. Her father died at sea when she was 11. Her mother cleaned guest houses until her hands cracked. Eliza left school early, married young, and 2 years later found herself alone again, a single mother with a daughter and a suitcase of bills. She worked mornings at a bakery, kneading dough that smelled of yeast and saffron. Evenings, she changed sheets and holiday lets, lifting windows to chase out the stale breath of other people's weekends. On the kitchen shelf of her council flat sat the ceramic lark, its wing chipped, its key rusted. It had been her mother's, the little bird that once sang a thin lullaby. The day it fell and broke, Eliza glued it carefully and whispered, "We'll sing again." Sometimes, when rent threatened to drown her and damp bloomed on the bedroom wall, she held the silent lark and remembered that promise. It was her broken hope made small enough to carry. Maisie, her daughter 11 with freckles and wind-tangled hair, collected shells and facts. "Mum, did you know the tide here rises higher than a tall man?" she'd say, holding up a periwinkle. After school, they'd walk the Porthmeor sands, dry seaweed snapping underfoot, the air sharp with vinegar from chip shops and the clean tang of seaweed. Mrs. Trevithick from next door slipped them warm pasties when the oven was too full. "You'll find your chance, my bird," she'd tell Eliza, patting her arm with floury hands. Eliza nodded because she wanted to believe it. She believed in small things, fresh bread, honest work, the tilt of light on the water, reasons to think life could turn. Even a cave might matter, she told herself, though she could already hear Giles' laughter echoing against the stone. Mr. Corbett coughed gently. "There are papers to sign, Ms." Penrose Eliza blinked, returning to the damp office with its faded certificates and the smell of tea gone cold. "Yes, of course," she murmured, taking the pen he offered. The metal was cool against her fingers. She signed her name. Once, twice, 3 times. Each signature felt like a small defiance. "It's an unusual bequest," the solicitor said kindly, blotting the ink. "Your great-uncle was eccentric in his final years." "He was kind to me," Eliza said quietly. "He used to tell me stories of smugglers when I was small." Mr. Corbett nodded. "Yes, well, the cave is yours now, though I'm not sure what practical use." "Thank you," Eliza interrupted, rising from her chair. The wooden legs scraped against the floor. She tucked the folded deed into her handbag, felt the reassuring weight of the ceramic lark in her pocket, and headed for the door. Outside, the harbor air was thick with salt in the day's catch. Gulls wheeled overhead, their cries sharp against the gray sky. Eliza paused on the steps, her breath forming small clouds in the chill air. She could still hear Giles' words, dark and useless, like a splinter under her skin. A fisherman nodded as he passed, nets slung over his shoulder. "All right, Eliza?" he called. She smiled. "Yes, Tom. Just fine." The lie tasted metallic on her tongue. She wasn't fine. The rent was late, her hours at the bakery had been cut, and the damp in Maisie's bedroom was getting worse. But now she had a cave, a hole in the earth that even the sea only borrowed. It wasn't nothing, it was something that belonged to her family, had been kept for her. In a life where everything felt temporary or borrowed, even a dark space could be a beginning. She set off toward home, the slippery cobblestones beneath her feet as familiar as her own heartbeat. In her mind, she was already planning when to visit Truhella's grotto, what she would need. Torches, wellies, perhaps Mrs. Trevithick's grandson, who knew about tides. The mockery still stung, but something else was stirring beneath it. Curiosity and the faintest flicker of possibility. Word traveled fast in St. Ives. By afternoon, the harbor wore her news like a rumor in a bright scarf. At the bakery counter, a customer, with a glossy accent, asked for a saffron bun and added, "Heard you've inherited a cave, dear." How picturesque. At the laundrette, steam fogged the panes and someone whispered, "Poor Eliza, blessed with darkness." The town's divided faces were everywhere. Second homers stepping from black SUVs, locals hauling traps and crates, gulls skirting both with the same hunger. Eliza's fingers were stiff with flour as she kneaded the day's last batch. The kitchen smelled of yeast and warm sugar, a comforting contrast to the chill that had settled in her bones after the reading of the will. Mrs. Trembath, the bakery owner, glanced at her with undisguised curiosity. "That cave of yours, full of bats, is it?" she asked, sliding a tray of golden pasties into the cooling rack. "I haven't been yet," Eliza admitted, punching down the dough with more force than necessary. "I've only just signed the papers this morning." Mrs. Trembath tutted sympathetically. "Heard that Harrington fellow made quite the scene." "Don't let him bother you, girl. That man builds glass boxes for people who visit twice a year and call themselves locals." Eliza managed to smile, though the memory of his mockery still burned. She finished her shift with flour dusting her sleeves and the smell of fresh bread clinging to her hair. The afternoon light was fading as she walked to Maisie's school, the narrow streets crowded with tourists clutching ice creams despite the chill. Outside the school gates, mothers gathered in small clusters, voices dropping as she approached. Maisie bounded out, her school jumper askew, a paper clutched in her hand. "Mom! I got a gold star for my drawing of the lighthouse." "That's wonderful, love," Eliza said, taking her daughter's hand. "Show me when we get home." They walked together along the harbor front, where fishing boats bobbed gently against the stone walls. The tide was out, exposing a stretch of wet sand scattered with empty crab shells and tangled bits of fishing line. "Jenny says you got a cave," Maisie said suddenly, skipping to match Eliza's stride. "A real one, with smugglers and treasure." Eliza sighed. Of course Jenny knew. Her mother worked at the solicitor's office. "It's just a sea cave, Maisie." "No treasure, I'm afraid, just a hole in the cliff that Uncle Ephraim left me." "Can we go see it?" "Please?" Maisie tugged at her sleeve, eyes bright with excitement. "I can wear my wellies." "Soon," Eliza promised, though she wasn't sure when. Between shifts and the mountain of bills waiting at home, finding time to explore a worthless cave felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. The week twisted tighter. Hours were cut at the bakery. "Just till the season picks up," Mrs. Trembath assured her, not meeting her eyes. A letter with a council stamp warned of arrears. 2 months late, threat of eviction folded into the creases. On the cliff path, fresh signs appeared. Private, no access. Giles had fenced off the route to Porthmere Head, claiming safety concerns and future improvements. "You'll thank me when there's a proper viewing platform," he told Eliza in the co-op, selecting olives like small coins. Until then, best not go poking in holes. It's a public right-of-way, Eliza said, her voice steadier than she felt. Has been for centuries. Giles smiled, a flash of teeth too white to be trusted. Times change, my dear. The council's already approved my plans. Progress, you know. That night, the wind dropped and the damp came up. Their flat, 2 small bedrooms above a shuttered fish shop, felt like it was breathing in the chill. Eliza lay awake, listening to the drip from the bathroom tap, the muffled clink of bottles outside, Maisie's soft, even breathing. The eviction notice sat on the kitchen table, the red print bold against the white paper. Before dawn, she pulled on her thrift shop coat and set out with a torch. The beach was nearly black, the sea a slow, heaving animal. The mouth of the cave yawned where the cliff curled inward, smelling of iodine, stone, and old storms. Eliza ducked under the police tape Giles had strung across the path, feeling a small surge of defiance. This, at least, was hers. She stepped inside, her light catching on wet walls, limpets like dull studs, a rusted nail, a strip of rotted rope. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, a patient percussion. The cave narrowed toward the back, where the ceiling lowered and the walls pressed in. It was cold but not frightening, a place that had existed long before her troubles and would remain long after. She stood still until the sea's breath matched hers. The cave held its own silence, older than any insult. On the rock face, beneath a film of algae, she noticed a faint scratch. A 5-pointed star, and beside it, an arrow pointing toward a narrow cleft. It stirred something half-remembered, her grandfather's story of smuggler's marks, the smuggler's lullaby he used to hum when he thought no one was listening. A sign? Or just a scratch? She didn't know, but for the first time in days, the silence didn't feel like defeat. It felt like a held breath. The morning came too soon. Maisie sat at the kitchen table eating toast, legs swinging beneath her chair. "Can I come with you to the cave today?" she asked, voice hopeful. "After school?" Eliza thought of the arrow, the cleft in the rock. "We'll see," she said, brushing crumbs from her daughter's chin. At the bakery, Mrs. Trembath was subdued. "Got to let you go early today, Eliza," she said, not meeting her eyes. "Business is slow, and with the new place opening by the harbor..." Eliza's stomach tightened. "How early?" "Now, love." Just until things pick up again. Mrs. Trembath pressed a bag of day-old scones into her hands. "For you and Maisie." Outside, the sky was the color of dishwater, the air damp against her skin. Eliza walked to the harbor wall and sat watching the boats, the bag of scones warm against her chest. A gull landed nearby, its yellow eye assessing her with cold calculation. 2 months' rent outstanding, no bakery shifts, the cleaning work barely covered groceries. And now Giles had blocked access to the one thing she owned outright. The ceramic lark pressed against her hip, its broken wing a reminder of promises made. She thought of the arrow in the cave, the cleft she hadn't explored. There was nowhere else to go but forward, even if forward meant into darkness. That afternoon, she collected Maisie from school early. "We're going on an adventure," she told her, zipping up her daughter's coat against the chill. "The Khai?" Maisie's face lit up. "The cave," Eliza confirmed, taking her hand. "Our cave." They made their way along the coastal path, skirting the private signs and the new fence. The sea felt close, muttering against the reef. The cave mouth waited, dark against the gray cliff face. Together, they stepped into the shadows toward whatever secrets the darkness might hold. The sky was the color of pewter, and the sea felt close, muttering against the reef. Maisie tugged on Eliza's sleeve. "Can I come, Mum?" "Please, Eliza hesitated, glanced at the private sign, then at her daughter's eager face. "Stay close," she said, and they climbed down, palms gritty with salt. Inside the cave, the air was cool and damp, a smell like old coins and kelp. Their torchlight wandered over barnacled stone until Maisie spotted it, the star and the arrow, clearer now where Eliza had rubbed away algae. "What is it?" Maisie whispered, her voice small in the vastness. "A smuggler's mark, maybe," Eliza said, remembering her grandfather's stories. They used to bring brandy and lace through these huts, avoiding the taxmen. Maisie traced the star with her fingertip. Like pirates? More like people trying to survive, Eliza said, thinking of her own small deceptions, telling the council her hours hadn't been cut, hiding the final demand notices from Maisie. There, Maisie whispered, pointing to the cleft barely wide enough for a child. The gap exhaled cold. I can fit! Before Eliza could protest, Maisie had wriggled in, her jacket catching and releasing with a rasp. It opens up, came the muffled call. Eliza crouched, heart thudding. Pebbles clicked. A minute later, Maisie's hands appeared, passing out a tarred bundle wrapped in oilskin and tied with cord hardened by time. They knelt on the shingle where the light was kinder. The cord cracked and flaked under Eliza's fingers. Inside lay a biscuit tin, green paint crazed and blooming with rust. The lid offered a last stubbornness, then gave. A breath of trapped years rose, tobacco, salt, paper. On top was a folded letter, edges softened to velvet. Eliza read the handwriting aloud, careful. For Eliza's line, should the sea keep her word? Ephraim Penrose, 1937. Beneath the letter, wrapped in another layer of oilskin, was a canvas. Tar-sealed, gritty, smelling faintly of fish oil and thyme. They unwound it, hands shaking. The painting was of the harbor they knew. Boats like beetles, houses stacked, a crooked horizon, the sea as memory and muscle. At the bottom, scratched with a nail, a signature. A Wallace. With it lay a deed, its vellum browned, detailing ownership of Truhella's haven, including rights to the foreshore and any remnants of wreck and goods in safekeep. Eliza's breath fogged. Maisie touched the pane as if it were a warm cheek. Between her fingers, hope stopped being an idea. It became weight, texture, proof. The cave's breath shifted, and for once it felt like blessing. Who's a Wallace? Maisie asked, her finger hovering above the signature. Eliza shook her head. I'm not sure, love. The name tugged at the edge of her memory. Something her grandfather had mentioned once, about a fisherman who painted what he saw in his head rather than with his eyes. They wrapped everything carefully, the way it had been preserved. Outside, the light was fading, the sea darkening to indigo. Eliza tucked the bundle under her coat, sheltering it as they made their way back up the cliff path. The private sign glared at them, but for once, its threat seemed empty. That evening, after Maisie was asleep, Eliza spread the deed on the kitchen table under the flickering overhead light. The legal language was dense, but certain phrases stood out. In perpetuity, descendant rights, common access maintained. She read the letter again, her great-uncle's cramped handwriting speaking across decades. The painting belonged to my friend Alfred, who gave it in exchange for safe harbor during hard times. It may prove valuable someday, but the real treasure is the knowledge that our family has kept faith with the sea and those who work her. Eliza touched the ceramic lark on the shelf, its chipped wing a familiar comfort. Alfred Wallace. The name circled in her mind until recognition dawned. The fisherman painter whose work now hung in galleries, whose childlike renderings of boats and harbors had become sought after by collectors. Could it be the same man? The same Alfred? Morning brought a thin sun and a purpose. Eliza walked Maisie to school, then continued on to the library, a stone building that smelled of dust and furniture polish. The librarian, Mrs. Pascoe, looked up from her desk with mild surprise. Eliza Penrose! Haven't seen you in here since you were in pigtails. I need some information, Eliza said, her voice low. About Alfred Wallace. Mrs. Pascoe's eyebrows rose. The painter? Bit of a local celebrity now, isn't he? Though he died poor as a church mouse. She led Eliza to a shelf of local history books. Try this one. Got a whole chapter on him. The book confirmed what Eliza had begun to hope. Alfred Wallace, fisherman turned artist, whose work was now collected by museums and wealthy patrons. His paintings, once traded for food or shelter, now commanded prices that made her dizzy to contemplate. She copied, down a name, Dr. Henderson, curator at the Tate St. Ives, and closed the book with hands that trembled slightly. Outside, the harbor was busy with boats unloading the morning catch, the air sharp with fish and diesel. Eliza dialed the gallery's number from a payphone, leaving a message with a receptionist who sounded skeptical when she mentioned having a possible Wallace original. "Dr. Henderson will contact you if he's interested," she said, her tone suggesting this was unlikely. Back at the flat, Eliza unwrapped the painting again, studying it under the kitchen's harsh light. The harbor was unmistakable, though rendered in the flat perspective of memory rather than sight. The colors were muted by time but still vivid. Blue-black sea, rust-red boats, white-walled cottages climbing the hill. It wasn't beautiful in any conventional sense, but it held something that made her heart ache. Truth, perhaps, or the simplicity of a life lived close to the elements. The phone rang that afternoon, startling her. Dr. Henderson's voice was brisk, but not unkind. "Miss Penrose, I understand you believe you have a Wallace piece. Could you describe it?" Eliza did her best, feeling inadequate to the task. How to explain the way the painting on it made her feel, as if she were seeing her town through the eyes of someone who loved it without pretense? "Interesting," he said when she'd finished. "And you say it came with provenance?" "A letter?" "Yes, Kai," Eliza confirmed. "From my great-uncle Ephraim Penrose. He mentioned receiving it from Alfred directly." There was a pause. "I'd like to see it, if that's possible." Tomorrow morning? That night, Eliza dreamt of the cave, not dark and threatening, but lit from within by a gentle phosphorescence. In the dream, the walls whispered stories of endurance, of treasures hidden not from greed but for safekeeping. She woke to the sound of rain against the window, and Maisie's warm body curled against hers. The gallery was quiet when they arrived, the reception area smelling of fresh paint and coffee. Dr. Henderson was younger than Eliza had expected, with kind eyes behind horn-rimmed glasses. He unwrapped the painting with careful hands, his expression changing from polite interest to something sharper. "Good Lord," he murmured, turning the canvas to catch the light. "This is extraordinary." The brushwork, the composition, classic early Wallace before the dealers got to him. He looked up at Eliza, eyes bright. "Where did you say you found this?" "In a cave," Maisie blurted before Eliza could answer. "Our cave, with a star and an arrow on the wall." Dr. Henderson smiled at her. "A proper treasure hunt, then." To Eliza, he added, "This is significant." "Museum quality. The letter and deed provide excellent provenance. With your permission, I'd like to authenticate it formally." Eliza thought of the eviction notice, the lost bakery job, Giles's mockery. "What would that mean?" she asked, her voice steady despite the hope. Bubbling beneath. "It means, Doctor," Henderson said gently, "that your life is about to change." News leapt faster than gulls on a chip. By week's end, the community hall smelled of raincoats and tea as neighbors packed the rows, faces bright with curiosity. On stage, Dr. Henderson from Tate St. Ives adjusted his scarf and spoke about Alfred Wallace, the fisherman artist whose work lived between sea and dream, whose paintings, rare, raw, were prizes in the art world. He lifted the tar-sealed canvas under careful lights. Gasps moved like a wave through the room. "Authentic," he said softly, "and significant." Eliza sat in the third row, Maisie beside her, both wearing their best clothes, still worn at the edges but clean and pressed. Mrs. Trevithick patted Eliza's hand, her palm warm and reassuring. The mayor nodded from his seat near the front, his usual indifference replaced by attentive interest. "Alfred Wallace painted from memory, not observation, Doctor," Henderson continued, his voice carrying through the hushed room. His work captured St. Ives as it was, a working harbor, not a holiday postcard. This particular piece dates from his early period, before he was discovered by London artists. The provenance is exceptional, a direct gift to Ephraim Penrose, documented and preserved. Eliza felt strange hearing her family name spoken with such respect. All her life, Penrose had been attached to small things, council bills, second-hand uniforms, the smallest flat in the block. Now it echoed against the hall's wooden beams, carrying the weight of history and unexpected fortune. Giles Harrington stood near the exit, jaw tight. He had sent a letter that morning offering Eliza a modest finder's fee in exchange for managing the complexities of coastal rights and sale, a polite attempt to buy silence. Eliza carried his letter folded in her pocket, the paper warm from her palm. Their eyes met across the room. His narrowed slightly before he looked away. "The painting's value is significant, Doctor," Henderson was saying, "but perhaps more important is the confirmation of the deed found with it. The coastal rights to Truehella's Haven, including the cave and foreshore. Such rights are increasingly rare and valuable." A murmur spread through the room. Maisie squeezed Eliza's hand, her small fingers tight with excitement. "The council will need to review the documents, of course," the mayor said, straightening his tie. "There are development plans already approved. The deed predates any modern agreements, Doctor." Henderson interrupted gently, "and has been continuously held by the Penrose family. Legal precedent strongly favors the original rights." After the meeting, neighbors clustered around Eliza, voices overlapping like waves. "Always knew you had good blood in you, girl. Your grandfather would be proud. That Harrington fellow won't be blocking the path now, will he?" Eliza smiled and nodded, feeling both seen and strangely invisible, as if they were looking at a version of her that had just been born. Only Maisie's hand in hers felt real, an anchor in the shifting landscape of her life. Outside, the evening air was cold and clear. Stars pricked the darkness above the harbor, where lights from fishing boats swayed gently. Giles approached, his cashmere coat buttoned against the chill. "Miss Penrose," he said, voice carefully neutral. "A moment?" Eliza hesitated, then nodded to Maisie. "Wait by the steps, love." "I won't be long." Giles waited until they were alone. "An extraordinary discovery," he said, smile not quite reaching his eyes. "You must be feeling quite fortunate." "It was my great-uncle's all along," Eliza replied. "He kept it safe for us." "Yes, well," Giles cleared his throat. "I hope you received my letter. My offer stands. A reasonable sum for the painting and the rights. Clean, simple, no legal complications. You could move somewhere more suitable for Maisie. Better schools, proper heating." The implication hung in the air between them, that her life was insufficient, that the best outcome would be escape rather than transformation. Something hardened in Eliza's chest. "Thank you for your concern," she said, "but I'll be keeping the painting and the rights." "The path stays open," his smile thinned. "I don't think you understand the complexities involved. Development permissions, council regulations, it can get very messy. My offer protects you from all that." "Protects me," Eliza repeated, the word tasting bitter. "The way your fence protected access to land my family has held for generations?" A flush crept up Giles' neck. "Be reasonable, Ms. Penrose, you're not equipped to handle what comes next. The lawyers, the negotiations, it's a different world." In that moment, Eliza saw him clearly. Not as the polished, confident developer who had made her feel small in the solicitor's office, but as a man accustomed to solutions money could buy, uncomfortable when faced with something that couldn't be purchased. "It's my world now too," she said simply, and turned away. That night, Eliza sat at the kitchen table after Maisie was asleep. "Doctor," Henderson's card propped against the salt cellar. The curator had mentioned figures that made her hands tremble. Museum acquisition funds, private collectors eager for authenticated Wallace works. Enough to secure the flat, pay off debts, create a small safety net. But it was the deed that occupied her thoughts, the yellowed paper with its formal language conferring rights her family had held but forgotten. Rights that granted control over the cave, the foreshore, the path Giles had fenced off. Rights that might shape not just her future, but the character of the place she called home. The council meeting was set for Monday. Development permissions would be reviewed, Giles' plans examined against her claim. There would be arguments about progress and preservation, about who had the right to determine Porthmere's future. Eliza touched the ceramic lark, tracing its chipped wing with her fingertip. For years, she had moved through St. Ives like a ghost, present but unremarkable, serving in shops and cleaning holiday lets. watching as the town she knew was slowly transformed into somewhere she couldn't afford to live. The familiar corners and weathered stones replaced by glass balconies and stripped pine, the smell of fish and seaweed giving way to coffee and scented candles. Now she had a voice. Unexpected and unprepared, but hers nonetheless. The knowledge sent a shiver through her, part fear, part strange exhilaration. In the morning, she walked Maisie to school, then continued on to Mrs. Trembath's bakery. The familiar smell of yeast and warm sugar wrapped around her as she stepped inside. "Eliza!" Mrs. Trembath called, flour dusting her forearms. "Just heard the news." "A proper painting, is it? And rights to the cave?" "It seems so," Eliza said, feeling self-conscious under the older woman's gaze. Mrs. Trembath wiped her hands on her apron. "Always said you'd find your feet." "Will you be wanting your job back then?" "No hard feelings if not." The question caught Eliza off guard. In the whirlwind of discovery, she hadn't thought that far ahead. To a life where choices might be possible, where necessity didn't dictate every decision. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "There's the council meeting on Monday. Until then, everything feels unsettled." Mrs. Trembath nodded. "Whatever happens, you've earned a bit of good fortune. That Harrington fellow's been in a right state. Came in this morning talking about obstruction of progress and local limitations. Bought 6 pasties and didn't eat a one." She chuckled. Some problems can't be fixed with money, can they? Outside, the harbor was waking. Boats unloading, cafe doors opening, seagulls arguing over scraps. The town felt both familiar and new, as if Eliza were seeing it through 2 lenses at once, the St. Ives she had always known and the St. Ives she might help shape. The weight of that possibility settled around her shoulders like a cloak, heavy but not without warmth. Monday arrived with a sky like washed slate and a sea that muttered against the harbor wall. The council chamber smelled of furniture polish and damp coats as people filed in, shaking raindrops from umbrellas and lowering voices to respectful murmurs. Eliza sat in the front row, her good blouse buttoned to the throat, the folder containing the deed and Giles' letter on her lap. Dr. Henderson nodded from across the aisle, his presence a silent reassurance. Mayor Pengelly called the meeting to order, the gavel's sharp crack cutting through the hum of conversation. "We're here to discuss the development plans for Porthmere Head in light of recent discoveries." His gaze flicked to Eliza, then back to his notes. "Mr. Whitner." Harrington will present his case first, followed by Ms. Penrose Giles Rose, immaculate in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Eliza's monthly rent. He clicked a remote and images appeared on the screen behind him. Architectural renderings of glass-walled apartments, a sleek visitor center, pathways lined with tasteful lighting. "Progress and preservation can coexist," he began, his voice smooth as poured honey. "My development brings needed investment to St. Ives, jobs tourism, increased property values. The viewing platform will actually improve public access to the coastline, making it safer, more accessible." He paused, allowing the images to speak. Clean lines, uncluttered vistas, a future without fish scales or rust, or the inconvenient messiness of working lives. "As for the supposed deed," he continued, a note of regret entering his voice, "our legal team has concerns about its validity. The document appears authentic, but may not cover the specific areas in question. The council has already granted preliminary permissions based on thorough research into land ownership. To reverse course now would expose the council to significant liability." He turned toward Eliza, his expression a perfect blend of sympathy and firmness. "I understand, miss. Penrose's attachment to the area. That's why my offer, which she's unfortunately declined, was generous. Sometimes progress requires difficult choices. I'm simply asking that we all consider the greater good of St. Ives." Eliza felt the weight of eyes upon her as Giles returned to his seat. The chamber had grown quieter, the only sound the soft patter of rain against the windows. Her heart thudded against her ribs as she rose, clutching her folder. "I was told a cave was a joke," she said, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I was told not to poke in holes." But the cave kept what our town once was: work, friendship, trust. She held up the old deed. My great-grandfather's mark is here. So is the right-of-way Giles fenced off. She looked around the room, taking in the faces. Mrs. Trembath, soil-stained crinkles around her eyes. Tom Fisher with salt-rough hands. Mrs. Trevithick from next door. Young parents who struggled with rents that climbed each season. Older residents who remembered when cottages held families, not holidaymakers. This isn't about just one cave or one painting, she continued, finding her rhythm. It's about who decides what St. Ives becomes. For generations, my family kept watch over that stretch of coast. Not to profit from it, to protect it for everyone. That's what the deed means. That's what the path means. The mayor cleared his throat. The painting. I understand it's valuable. Dr. Henderson rose. Exceptionally so. Museum-quality Wallace works rarely come to market, especially with such clear provenance. The Tate is prepared to offer a significant sum for acquisition, subject to Ms. Penrose's wishes, of course. A murmur rippled through the room. Giles leaned forward. May I ask what figure we're discussing, for context? Dr. Henderson named a sum that made the air shift, as if everyone had inhaled at once. Giles's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Congratulations, Ms. Penrose, he said. A fortunate discovery indeed. Perhaps we could discuss a revised offer in private? Eliza unfolded his letter. She read the offer aloud, and its careful words sounded thin against the crackle of truth. A modest finder's fee, she quoted, in exchange for managing the complexities of coastal rights. You knew what the painting was worth, didn't you? You knew what the rights were worth. Giles's smile faltered, the gloss slipping to show impatience, then embarrassment. Business is business, he said, but his voice had lost its velvet edge. No, Eliza replied. People's homes aren't just business. Neither is their history. She turned to the council members. The deed is clear. The path stays open. The cave and foreshore remain protected, not just for me, but for St. Ives. Mayor Pengelly adjusted his glasses. And the development plans? Can proceed on the land Mr. Harrington legitimately owns, Eliza said, but not on the protected foreshore, and not by blocking the path that's been open for centuries. The mayor conferred with the clerk, heads bent over papers. The room held its breath. Lifeboat crews, shopkeepers, Mrs. Trevithick with flowers still on her sleeves, all watching as the future shifted on its axis. The deed appears legally sound, the mayor announced finally. Council permissions will need to be reviewed in light of these established rights. He looked at Giles. Mr. Harrington, you'll need to submit revised plans that respect the protected areas and public access. Giles' face flushed. This is absurd. You can't allow one piece of paper to derail progress. It's not just paper, Tom Fisher interrupted, rising from his seat. His voice, usually softened by years of calling over wind and waves, filled the chamber. It's our right to walk where our fathers walked. It's our harbor, our cliffs. He nodded to Eliza. Some things are not for buying or selling. Other voices joined his, not in shouting, but in steady agreement. The mood in the room shifted like a turning tide, from spectators watching a contest to participants claiming their place. Not vengeance, but vindication filled the air. A warm, rising thing. Eliza looked to Maisie, whose eyes shone like wet pebbles in sun. In that moment, the cave, the town, the long years, everything felt seen. The conservator cleared his throat. Miss Penrose, with your permission, Tate would like to exhibit the painting. We estimate its value. He named a sum that made the room exhale, and we'd be honored to display it as the Penrose Wallace, acknowledging your family's role in its preservation. Eliza blinked, the title unexpected. All her life she had been Eliza from the bakery or Maisie's mum, or simply invisible. The woman who changed the sheets, who served the bread, who existed in the background of other people's holidays. Now her name would be linked to something lasting, something that mattered. After the meeting, people gathered on the cobblestones outside, voices animated despite the drizzle. Hands clasped Eliza's shoulder, offered congratulations, shared memories of the path and cave from childhood's decades past. Giles stood apart, phone pressed to his ear, face tight with calculation. "What will you do with the money?" Mrs. Trevithick asked, pulling her cardigan close against the chill. Eliza looked toward the harbor where boats rocked gently against their moorings. "Secure our home," she said, "and perhaps help secure others." Mrs. Trevithick squeezed her arm. "Always said you had a good heart, didn't I? Like your mother before you." The rain eased, leaving the air washed and the stones gleaming. Dr. Henderson approached, umbrella folded neatly under his arm. "There will be paperwork, arrangements. The exhibition could open by summer, if you're agreeable." Eliza nodded, still trying to grasp the transformation taking place. Not just in her circumstances, but in how she was seen, how she saw herself. A woman who owned something of value. A woman with a voice that carried. "The cave remains yours, of course, Doctor," Henderson added, "though I hope you'll consider allowing researchers access occasionally. There may be other historical significances we haven't yet uncovered." "The cave belongs to St. Ives," Eliza said quietly. "My family just kept it safe." She felt Maisie's hand slip into hers, small fingers warm against her palm. Together they walked toward home. Not the path of retreat she had imagined when Giles first made his offer, but a path of return, of claiming space that had always been partly theirs. The air smelled of wet stone and salt, of possibilities breaking open like the sky after storm. Rain gave way to a clean blue morning. The fence on the cliff path came down. A new wooden sign read, "Public right-of-way," the letters dark against fresh grain. Eliza's flat smelled of fresh paint, the damp chased off with laughter and lemon oil. On the table beside the ceramic lark lay a press clipping about the exhibition at Tate St. Ives, and a letter confirming the sale that would buy their home and repair 2 others on their row. Eliza had asked the council to direct a portion toward the lifeboat fund and a bursary for children of fishers, small anchors for a town pulled by tides. Through the open window came sounds that once would have irritated: gulls squabbling, a delivery truck backing up, children shouting on their way to school, but now felt like the texture of a life she could fully inhabit. She brewed tea, the familiar ritual carrying new meaning now that it wasn't squeezed between shifts or hurried before dawn. Maisie entered in her school jumper, cheeks pink. "Mum," she said, hesitating, "are we rich now?" Eliza smiled and brushed salt-stiff hair from her daughter's forehead. "We're safe," she answered, "and we'll share." She lifted the lark and turned its rusted key. It still would not sing, but in the quiet kitchen came another sound, the soft purr of a home that felt like theirs. "Can I still collect shells?" Maisie asked, voice suddenly anxious. "Jenny said when people get money, they change." Eliza knelt, meeting her daughter's eyes. "We might change a little, yeah," she said gently, "but not the important parts. Not the parts that know shells matter, or that friends like Mrs. Trevithick are precious, or that our place is here." Maisie nodded, reassured. "Will we still visit the cave?" "Of course," Eliza said. "It's part of our story now." After walking Maisie to school, the same route, but somehow lighter, Eliza continued to the bakery. Mrs. Trembath looked up from rolling dough, surprise and pleasure mingling on her flour-dusted face. "Eliza! Didn't expect to see you here. Not now you're practically famous." Eliza smiled. "I was wondering if you still need help." "Not full-time, but perhaps mornings? I've missed the smell of bread rising." Mrs. Trembath's eyes crinkled. "Could always use an extra pair of hands. But are you sure? You don't need to work now, from what I hear." "I want to," Eliza said simply. "It's part of who I am." Later on the cliff, the sea breathed calmly, and even the gulls seemed to glide with less hunger. The path wound along the headland, open now to all who wished to walk it. Yellow gorse bloomed among the rocks, filling the air with its coconut scent. The The cave mouth waited below, a dark promise against the pale stone. Giles Harrington approached in a raincoat too fine for the wind. He stopped, looked out at the water. "Miss." "Penrose," he said, voice smaller. "I was wrong." Eliza nodded. "People can be," she replied, not unkindly, "but the path stays open." "My plans have been revised," he continued, smaller. "Set back from the cliff, with local builders as requested by the council." He hesitated. "I underestimated what this place means to people." "Not just the place," Eliza said. "The belonging." He swallowed, eyes damp with something that might have been understanding, or perhaps just the sting of salt air. "Yes, well, good day." He left without slogans or promises, a man perhaps seeing for the first time the contours of a world not shaped entirely by wealth. The afternoon mellowed toward evening. Eliza met Maisie from school, and they walked together to Mrs. Trevithick's, where the smell of fresh pasties filled the small kitchen. The older woman hugged them both, her embrace smelling of flour and lavender water. "Just saw the paper," she said, setting cups of tea before them. "Our Eliza with a painting in the Tate." "Who'd have thought?" "Not me," Eliza admitted. "None of this feels quite real yet." "Oh, it's real enough," Mrs. Trevithick said, cutting a pasty in half for Maisie. "Real as anything in St. Ives. Just a different kind of real from before. They talked of small things. How the Stevens boy had caught his first mackerel. How the pub was finally fixing its leaky roof. How the spring tides had brought a carpet of tiny shells to the harbor beach. Normal conversations made extraordinary by the freedom to simply sit and have them, without watching the clock for the next shift or counting pennies for the electric meter. As they left, Mrs. Trevithick pressed Eliza's hand. "Your mother would be proud, my bird, seeing you stand your ground like that." Eliza's throat tightened. "I wish she could have known." "Oh, she knows," the older woman said with certainty. "Some things travel further than we think." That evening, they walked past the cave as the tide turned, and the air smelled of kelp and cold iron. The sea breathed in and out, patient as centuries. Maisie squeezed her hand. "What did the cave really give us, Mum?" she asked, her voice small against the vastness. Eliza met her daughter's gaze, the lighthouse's slow blink, painting their faces gold, then shadow, gold, then shadow. "It gave us back our name," she said, "and our ground." She glanced at the darkening sea and added, gently, "Love and dignity are treasures no one can steal." Maisie nodded, satisfied. They continued along the path that generations had walked before them, that generations would walk after. Behind them, the cave kept its quiet watch. A darkness that had yielded light, a void that had contained fullness. In the flat that night, Eliza opened the windows to let in the harbor sounds. Boats creaking against moorings, the distant hum of the pub, waves lapping stone. She unpacked a box that had arrived that afternoon. Copies of the exhibition catalog, with the Wallace painting on the cover and the words "The Penrose Collection" beneath. She traced the letters with her fingertip, feeling their weight. Not just her name, but her lineage. The great-uncle who had hidden the painting, the grandfather who had told her smuggler's tales, the mother who had given her the ceramic lark and taught her to mend broken things. Links in a chain that stretched backward into history and forward into possibility. On her bedside table, the lark stood sentinel, its broken wing a reminder of what endures despite damage. Beside it now lay a small, smooth stone Maisie had found on the beach. Ordinary, unremarkable, except for the perfect five-pointed star fossil embedded in its surface. A star like the smuggler's mark in the cave, like the one that had led them to the painting, like the ones that had guided fishermen home for centuries. Eliza touched it gently. Some treasures were monetary, changing lives with their value. Others were simpler, but no less profound. The right to walk ancestral paths, to belong to a place, to pass on stories that connect past to future. To stand in the light of one's own dignity, undiminished by mockery or doubt. Outside, the tide turned again. The sea breathed out, the land received. Somewhere beneath the cliff, the cave, Filled with water, then emptied. A rhythm older than memory, constant as hope. Eliza closed her eyes and listened to the sound of home. Not just walls and roof, but belonging. Not just shelter, but certainty. The knowledge that some things once found cannot be lost again.